Chapter 13, last chapter, and I gotta go get some new books from the library, which would be good so I could read them over this Christmas break. So I'm not sure if, like, because I remember the hero, he calls him the hero because I'm talking about, you know, obviously in this book, he was at a ball and then he grabbed like that young princess's hand or something. She screams, but then there's this double. Like, why is the double even there though? Like, I don't know, it's kind of weird. And now she sends him a letter like to sneak away, but it sounds like a setup kind of. And then also, why is the double there? This is the last chapter, so I'm interested. But chapter 13, it seemed that the weather was trying to change for the better. In fact, the wet snow that had been falling up to then in great clouds gradually began to fall more thinly and finally stopped almost completely. The sky became visible with a few tiny stars twinkling here and there. It was just wet, muddy, damp, and steamy, especially for Mr. Golyakin, who already had difficulty catching his breath. His coat, which was soaked and weighed down by the wet, made him feel a disagreeable warmth and dampness all over, and his weight made his already terribly weak legs buckle. A feverish trembling spread all over his body, producing a sharp, tingling sensation. Sheer exhaustion squeezed the cold, sickly sweat out of him, so that at this suitable moment, Mr. Golyakin forgot to repeat his favorite phrase with his characteristic determination and resolve that somehow it might possibly, surely, undoubtedly, certainly turn out for the best. Still, none of this matters for the moment, added our plucky and undaunted hero, wiping from his face the drops of cold water streaming in all directions from the brim of his hat that was too sodden to hold any more water. Adding that everything was still all right, our hero tried to take a seat on the large log lying near a stack of firewood in Sofia Ivanovich's courtyard. Of course, there was no question now of thinking of Spanish serenades or silken ladders, but what he did need to think about was finding a quiet little corner which, if not actually warm, would at least be comfortable and secluded. He was strongly tempted, let it be mentioned in passing, by that particular little corner on Sofia Ivanovich's landing where our hero had once before, almost at the beginning of this voracious story, waited for a whole 2 hours between the cupboard and some old screens among all kinds of domestic rubbish and unwanted junk. The fact was that even now he had been standing waiting 2 solid hours in Sofia Ivanovich's courtyard. But now there were certain inconveniences that had not existed before concerning his former quiet and cozy little corner. The first was that the place had probably now been noticed since that scandal at Sofia Ivanovich's last ball, and precautionary measures taken. Secondly, he must now await the agreed signal from Clara Osipevna, since there must be some kind of agreed signal. That was the way things were always done, and were not the first, and we shan't be the last, as he put it. Just then, most opportunely, Mr. Golyakin remembered in passing a novel he had read a long time before, where the heroine had given a prearranged signal to Alfred in exactly similar circumstances by tying a pink ribbon to her window. But now at night, when St. Petersburg climate, so notorious for its dampness and unreliability, a pink ribbon was out of the question. In brief, it was quite impossible. No, this isn't the time for silken ladders, thought our hero. I better stay where I am on my way on my own. Stand here, for example, nice and quietly where no one can see me. And he selected a spot in the courtyard directly opposite the windows near the stack of wood. Of course, many postilions, coachmen, and visitors were constantly passing through the courtyard. In addition, there were wheels clattering and horses snorting and so on. But for all that, it was a convenient spot. Whether he was noticed or not, there was now at least the advantage that everything, in a manner of speaking, was to some extent in shadow, so that he could see absolutely everything and no one could see Mr. Golyakin. The windows were brightly lit. Some kind of ceremonial gathering was in progress at Sofia Ivanovich's. As yet, no music could be heard. So it can't be a ball. They must have gathered for another reason, our hero thought, his heart sinking. But as it today flashed through his mind, was there a mistake about the date? Well, it's possible. Anything is possible. Yes, anything is possible. It's possible. It was yesterday that the letter was written, but it didn't reach me. It didn't reach me because Petrushka got involved in it, that scoundrel. Or perhaps tomorrow was written there, that everything had to be done tomorrow. That is to be waiting with the carriage. Here, our hero went cold all over and fumbled in his pocket for the letter so that he could check. But to his amazement, the letter was not in his pocket. How is this, half dead? Mr. Golyakin whispered. Where could I have left it? Does this mean I've lost it? Well, that's the last straw, he groaned at length. What if it falls into evil hands now? Perhaps it already has. Good heavens, that will be the upshot of all this. The upshot will be that, oh my wretched fate. Here, Mr. Golyakin trembled like a leaf at the thought that his shameless twin When I got wind of it from Mr. Golyakin's enemies, I perhaps hurled his coat over his head with the express purpose of stealing that letter. What's more, he's intercepting it as evidence. But why evidence? After the initial shock and stupor of horror, the blood rushed to Mr. Golyakin's head, groaning, gnashing his teeth, and clutching his burning head. He sank down on his log and started thinking about something, but somehow his thoughts wouldn't connect with anything. There were glimpses and memories of faces at times, vividly and vaguely, of others, and of long-forgotten events. Silly song tunes filled his head. The anguish was really unnatural. Oh God, he thought, slightly recovering and suppressing the dull sobs in his breast. Oh God, grant me fortitude in the bottomless depths of my tribulations. But there's no doubt whatsoever that I'm done for. I've disappeared, gone from this world completely, and all this is in the natural order of things. It just couldn't be otherwise. To start with, I've lost my job. I must have lost my job, and no way could I have not lost it. Well, supposing it all be sorted out there, supposing the little bit of money I got will be enough to begin with. I need a different little flat, a few bits of furniture. For a start, I shan't even have Petrushka with me. I can't cope without that scoundrel, and I'll have lodgers as well. That's good. And I can't come and go as I please, and Petrushka won't be there to grumble if I'm late. That's good. That's why it would be a good thing to have lodgers. Well, supposing that's all very good, only why do I always talk about the wrong thing? Always the wrong thing completely. Here the thought of his present predicament again lit up his memory. He looked around. Oh God, what am I talking about now? He wondered, clutching his burning head in utter confusion. Will you be wanting to go soon, sir? Said a voice above Mr. Golyakin. Mr. Golyakin gave a start, but it was only his cab driver, also soaked to the skin, chilled to the marrow, having taken it into his head in his impatience and from having nothing to do, to come and have a look at Mr. Golyakin behind the woodpile. I'm all right, my friend. My friend soon, very soon, so please wait. The cab driver went away, grumbling to himself. What's he grumbling about? Thought Mr. Golyakin through his tears. After all, I hired him for the evening, so really here I'm within my rights now. That's it. I hired him for the evening. That's the end of it. It makes no difference even if one has to stay here like this. I can please myself. I'm at liberty to go or not to go. And the fact that I'm standing here today behind the woodpile, well, there's nothing at all wrong with that. And don't you dare contradict me, I say. The gentleman chooses to stand behind the wood, firewood, so he stands behind firewood. And he won't blacken anyone's name by so doing. That's right. That's how it is, my dear young lady, if you really want to know. In our day and age, just no one, so to speak, lives in a hut. And in this industrial age, young lady, you'll get nowhere without good behavior, of which you provide such proof. One has to be a magistrate's clerk and live in a hut by the sea. Firstly, young lady, there are no magistrate's clerks on the seashore. And secondly, you and I couldn't even get a job as one of those magistrate's clerks. Let's suppose, for example, I apply for the job and present myself and say it's like this and that, and to be a magistrate's clerk and, and protect me from my enemy. They'll tell you, young lady, such and such, that there's lots of magistrates' clerks, and here you're not at Madame Falabalo's, where you learn good behavior, of which you provided such a baneful example. Good behavior, young lady, means staying at home, respecting your father, and not hankering after nice suitors before the time is ripe. Young lady, suitors, young lady, will come along all in good time. That's how it is. Of course, there's no doubt that you need to have acquired various talents, such as playing the piano now and then, speaking French, knowing history, geography, divinity, and arithmetic. That's how it is. We don't need more than that. And cookery in addition. Your knowledge of cookery should definitely be within the sphere of knowledge of every well-behaved young lady. Otherwise, what is there? Firstly, my beauty, my dear young lady. They won't let you go, but they'll raise a hue and cry, and you'll be trumped. And then it's into a convent. So what then, young lady? What would you have me do then? Would you have me go to a nearby hill and dissolve in tears after the fashion of certain novels as I contemplate the cold walls of your confinement and finally expire after the example of certain bad German poets and novelists? Isn't that so, young lady? But first, allow me to tell you as a friend that things aren't done that way. And secondly, I'll give you and your parents a good thrashing for letting you read French books. For French books will teach you no good. The poison and the pernicious poison, my dear young lady. Or do you think, if I may ask you, do you think this and that, so to speak, that will run away unpunished, and there's, so to speak, a hut for you by the seashore, and we'll start building and cooling and talking about different feelings and live happily ever after? And then along comes the nestling, so well, it's like this. It's this and that, so to speak. We'll tell our father and state counselor, Osify Ivanovich, that our nestlings come along, so on this auspicious occasion, will you withdraw your curse and bless the couple? No, young lady. Once again, things aren't done like that, and the first thing is that there won't be any building and cooing, so please don't pin your hopes on that. And nowadays, the husband, young lady, is master, and a good, well-brought-up wife must try and please him in everything. Displays of affection aren't in fashion in this industrial age. The days of Jean-Jacques Rousseau are past, so to speak. For example, these days, a husband comes home hungry from work and asks as if he could have a little snack before dinner. Darling, perhaps a glass of vodka to drink and a bit of herring. Well, young lady, you must have vodka and herring already for him. The husband will eat heartily and won't so much as give you a look. All I say is just pop into the kitchen, my little kid, and see the dinner. Perhaps just once a week, if you're lucky, he'll give you a kiss, and a pretty casual one at that. That's the way we do it, so to speak, and even then indifferently. That's how it will be if we think about it like that. If that's what things have to come to. If that's the way we started looking at things. But what's it all to do with me, and why, young lady, have you mixed me up in your idle fancies? A benevolent man who was suffering for my sake, you say, in so many ways, dear to my heart, and so on. Well, first, young lady, I'm not suited to you, you know that yourself. I'm no expert at paying compliments. I don't like uttering all that sweetly scented nonsense to the ladies. I have no time for womanizers, and I must confess my looks have never got me anywhere. You won't find any false bragging or false modesty in me, and now I confess it in all sincerity. That's how it is, so to speak. All I possess is a straightforward, open character and good sense. I don't get mixed up in intrigues. I'm an intriguer, so to speak, and I'm proud of it. So there you are. I don't wear a mask when I'm with decent people, and to tell all. Suddenly, Mr. Golyakin gave a start. The ginger beard of his cab driver again appeared around the woodpile. Coming right away, my friend, Mr. Golyakin replied in a trembling, languishing voice. I'm coming right away. The driver scratched the back of his head, then stroked his beard, then took one step forward. He stopped and eyed Mr. Golyakin mistrustfully. I'm coming right away, my friend. You see, my friend, I'll only be here a few seconds. You see, my friend, aren't you going anywhere at all? The driver finally said, going up to Mr. Golyakin resolutely and decisively. Oh, yes, my friend, I'm coming right away. You see, my friend, I'm waiting. Yes, sir. I see. You see, my friend. What village are you from, my dear? My dear man, I'm a serf. Do you have a good master? He's all right. Well, my friend, you just wait here, my friend. You see, my good friend, have you been long in St. Petersburg? Been driving a cab for a year. Are you going down well? Are you doing well, my friend? All right. Yes, my friend, yes. Thank Providence, my friend. You, my friend, should try and find a good man. These days, a good man is rare, my friend. He'll bathe you, give you food and drink, my dear chap. But sometimes you see that even money doesn't bring happiness. You see a lamentable example of that, my friend. That's how it is, dear chap. The cab driver suddenly appeared to feel sorry for Mr. Golyakin. All right, as you like, I'll wait, sir. Will you be waiting much longer, sir? No, my friend, well, you know how it is. I shan't wait any longer, dear man. What do you think, dear chap? I'm relying on you. I shan't be waiting here any longer. So do you want to be going anywhere? No, my friend, no, but I'll show my gratitude, dear man. That's it. Well, how much do I owe you, dear chap? What we agreed on, sir, that's what you should give me. I've been waiting here a long time, sir. Please don't be hard on me. Well, here you are, my friend, here you are. Mr. Golyakin paid the cab driver the 6 silver rubles, and having decided in earnest not to waste any more time, that is, to leave while the going was good, particularly now that the matter had already been settled and that the driver sent away, there was no point in waiting any longer. He walked out of the courtyard, out through the gates, turned left, and without a backward glance, panting and rejoicing, broke into a run. Perhaps it'll all be settled for the best, he thought. In this way, I've avoided trouble. In actual fact, Golyakin had suddenly grown unusually light at heart. If only it could be settled for the best, our hero wondered, but he did not put very much trust in his own words. Now I can, he thought. No, I'd better try a different approach. But on the other hand, wouldn't it be better to do? With these doubts and seeking a key and the solution to all his doubts, our hero ran as far as Semyonovsky Bridge, and having run as far as Semyonovsky Bridge, he prudently and finally decided to turn back. That's best, he thought. I better take a different approach. I mean, like this, I'll simply be an outside observer, and that's the end of the matter. I'll say I'm an observer, someone not involved, that's all. And whatever happens there, I'm not to blame. That's it. That's how it will be. It will be now. Having decided to return, our hero did in fact turn back, particularly in view of the fact that thanks to his happy idea, he had now set himself up as a complete outsider. That's best. You're not responsible for anything. You'll just see what comes of it. That's the way. Therefore, his calculations were absolutely correct, and the matter will be closed. Having set his mind at rest, he withdrew into the tranquil haven of his comforting and protected woodpile and began to concentrate his attention on the windows. This time he did not have a watch and wait for long. Suddenly, there was a strange kind of movement at the windows at all. Once figures were glimpsed, curtains drawn back, and also Ivanovitch's windows became crowded with the whole groups of people, all of them searching for something in the courtyard. Secure behind his woodpile, our hero in turn watched the general commotion with curiosity, stretching his hand to the right and left, at least as far as the short shadow of the woodpile that was concealing him allowed. Suddenly, he was struck dumb, shuddered, and sat cowering on the spot in horror. He realized in brief he had guessed correctly, that they were not looking for anyone or anything. They were simply looking for him, Mr. Golyakin. Everyone was looking in his direction. Everyone was pointing in his direction. To run away was impossible. They would see him. The dumbstruck Mr. Golyakin huddled as closely as he could to the woodpile, and only then did he notice that the treacherous shadow had betrayed him by failing to conceal all of him. With the greatest pleasure, our hero would have agreed to creep into a mouse hole in the woodpile and sit there quietly, if only that were possible. But it was absolutely impossible. In his agony, He finally began to stare directly and boldly at all the windows at once. That was best. Suddenly he blushed furiously with shame. He had quite clearly been spotted. Everyone had seen him at the same time. Everyone was beckoning to him. Everyone was nodding. Everyone was calling out to him. Several windows clicked open. Several voices started shouting something to him simultaneously. I'm amazed those sluts aren't thrashed when they're still little girls. I'm amazed those sluts aren't thrashed when they're still little girls, he muttered to himself, utterly flustered. Suddenly, he, we know who, came running down the steps, wearing only his uniform, hatless, breathless, prancing and frisking perfidiously, giving expression to his overwhelming joy at seeing Mr. Golyakin at once. Yakov Petrovich, twittered that man, so notorious for his worthlessness. Are you here? You'll catch cold. Yakov Petrovich, it's cold here. Please come in. Yakov Petrovich. No, I'm all right, Yakov Petrovich, our hero muttered submissively. But you can't, Yakov Petrovich. They're begging you most humbly. They're all waiting. Do make us happy, they say, and bring Yakov Petrovich here. That's what they're saying. No, Yakov Petrovich, I better. You see, I better be going home now. Our hero said, so mortified and horrified that he felt as if you were going to be roasted over a slow fire and at the same time freezing with shame and horror. No, 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 twittered the loathsome man. No, 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 not for anything. Let's go, he said with determination, dragging Mr. Golyakin towards the porch. Mr. Golyakin Sr. had no desire whatsoever to go, but since everyone was watching, it would have been silly to struggle and dig his heels in. So he went out, our hero. However, it couldn't be said that he went because he had positively no idea what was happening to him. But then, at the same time, it was all right. Before our hero had time to somehow recover and come to his senses, he found himself in the reception hall. He was pale, harassed, and disheveled. He glanced at the whole crowd with lackluster eyes and horror. The reception hall, all the rooms were filled to overflowing. There were masses of people, a whole hothouse of ladies, all were milling around Mr. Golyakin, all were surging towards Mr. Golyakin. He could see very well that they were pushing him in a certain direction. Surely not to the doors flashed through his mind. Indeed, they were not pushing him towards the doors, but straight towards Osify Ivanovich's comfortable armchair. On one side of the chair stood Clara Osievna, pale, languid, melancholy, but sumptuously attired. Mr. Golyakin was particularly struck by the little white flowers in her black hair that created such a wonderful effect. On the other side of the chair, in black tailcoat and with his new decoration in his buttonhole, stood Vladimir Semyonovich. Mr. Golyakin, as we have already said, was taken by the arms and escorted straight towards Osify Ivanovich. On one side by Mr. Golyakin Jr., who had now assumed an extraordinary decorous and loyal air, which gladdened our hero no end, and on the other by Andrei Filipovich, wearing the most solemn expression. What could it be, wondered Mr. Golyakin, but when he saw that they were leading him to Osify Ivanovich, it all dawned on him in a flash. The thought of that intercepted letter darted through his brain. In unbounded agony, our hero stood before Osify Ivanovich's chair. What shall I do now? He thought. Of course, it should all be on a bold footing, that is, with candor, not lacking in nobility. I'll say this and I'll say that, and so on. What our hero had evidently been fearing did not come to pass. Osify Ivanovich seemed to give Mr. Golyakin a very warm reception. Although he did not offer his hand, he at least, when looking at him, shook his hoary head that inspired great respect, shook it with a sad, yet at the same time well-disposed air. At least, so it seemed to Mr. Golyakin. He even thought he could detect glistening tears in Osify Ivanovich's lackluster eyes. He looked up, and it seemed to him that there was also a tiny tear gleaming on an eyelash of Clara Osovievna, who was standing close by, and that something of the kind was also visible in Vladimir Semyonovich's eyes, and that finally Andrei Filipovich's calm, imperturbable dignity was no less appropriate amidst all the general lachrymose sympathy. And that even the young man who had once so strongly resembled an important counselor was sobbing bitterly, taking advantage of the moment. Or perhaps it was all in Mr. Golyakin's imagination, since he himself had burst into tears and was acutely conscious of his hot tears coursing down his cheeks, his cold cheeks. In a voice filled with sobs, reconciled with mankind and destiny, at that moment overflowing with affection, not only for Osify Ivanovich and all the guests taken together, but even for his pernicious twin, who was evidently not in the least pernicious now, and not even Mr. Golyakin's twin, but a somehow extraneous and extremely amiable person in himself. Our hero attempted to address Osify Ivanovich with a touching effusion and soulful outpouring, but in the fullness of all that had been accumulating within him, he could not express anything at all, but could only point with an eloquent gesture at his heart. At length, Andrei Filipovich, probably wishing to spare the hoary-headed old man's sensibilities, drew Mr. Golyakin a little to one side and left him completely to his own devices, smiling and muttering to himself, somewhat bewildered, but in any event almost entirely reconciled with mankind and destiny. Our hero began to make his way somewhere through the solid crowd of guests. Everyone made way for him. Everyone looked at him with a kind of strange curiosity and a mysterious, unaccountable sympathy. Our hero passed into the next room and was accorded the same attention everywhere. He was vaguely aware of the entire crowd falling hard on his heels, knowing his every step, furtively discussing among themselves something extremely interesting, shaking their heads, talking, arguing, passing judgment, and whispering. Mr. Golyakin longed to know what they were passing judgment on, arguing and whispering about. Looking around, our hero saw Mr. Golyakin Jr. at his side, feeling this urge to grab his arm and take him aside. Mr. Golyakin earnestly implored the other Yakov Petrovich to cooperate with him in all his future undertakings and not to abandon him at a critical juncture. Mr. Golyakin Jr. nodded gravely and firmly squeezed Golyakin Sr.'s hand. Our hero's heart started palpitating from an excess of emotion. At the same time, he felt he was suffocating, being hemmed in, terribly hemmed in. All those eyes fixed on him were somehow oppressing and crushing him. Mr. Golyakin happened to catch a glimpse of the bewigged counselor who was giving him a severe, searching look, quite unmoved by the general mood of sympathy. Our hero almost decided to go right up to him in order to smile at him and to have things out with him there and then. But for some reason, this came to naught. For a moment, Mr. Golyakin almost completely lost consciousness, lost his memory and all feeling. When he recovered, he noticed that he was rotating in a wide circle of guests who had gathered around him. Suddenly, someone shouted Golyakin's name from the next room, and the shout was immediately taken up by the entire crowd. Everything became agitated and noisy. Everyone in the rooms rushed to the doors of the reception hall. Our hero was almost carried aloft with them. Just then, the stony-hearted, bewigged counselor turned up right beside Mr. Golyakin. Finally, he took the latter by the arm, sat him on a chair next to him, opposite Osofy Ivanovich's chair, but at a quite considerable distance from him. Every single person became hushed and quieted down. Everyone observed a solemn silence. Everyone kept looking at Osofy Ivanovich, evidently expecting something not quite in the normal run of things. Mr. Golyakin noticed that the other Mr. Golyakin, together with Andrei Filipovich, had taken their places next to Osofy Ivanovich's chair, and also exactly opposite the counselor. The silence continued. They really were expecting something. Yes, exactly like in a family when someone's going away on a long journey. All we need to do now is stand up and say a prayer, reflected our hero. Suddenly there was a great stir which cut short all Mr. Golyakin's reflections. That long expected something had come to pass. He's coming, ran through the crowd. Who's coming, ran through Mr. Golyakin's head, and some strange sensation made him shudder. It's time, said the counselor, looking attentively at Andrei Filipovich, who in turn glanced at Osofy Ivanovich, nodded solemnly. Osofy Ivanovich nodded solemnly and gravely. Let us all be upstanding, said the counselor, helping Mr. Golyakin to his feet. Everyone stood up, and the counselor took Mr. Golyakin by the arm, while Andrei Filipovich took Mr. Golyakin Jr. and both solemnly led the two absolutely identical men through to the middle of the crowd that had gathered around, whose eyes were straining in expectation. Our hero looked around in bewilderment, but he was immediately stopped and his attention directed to Mr. Golyakin Jr., who offered his hand. They want us to make peace. Our hero thought and deeply moved, stretched out his hand to Mr. Golyakin Jr. and then leaned his head towards him. The other Mr. Golyakin followed suit. At this point, Mr. Golyakin Sr. had the impression that his treacherous friend was smiling, that he had given a fleeting, roguish wink at the entire surrounding crowd, that there was nothing sinister in the improper Mr. Golyakin Jr.'s expression, that he had even grimaced at the moment of his Judas kiss. There were ringing noises in Mr. Golyakin's head. There was darkness before his eyes. It seemed that a great multitude, a whole file of absolutely identical Golyakins, was noisily forcing open every door in the room, but it was too late. A resounding kiss of betrayal had rung out. And then something totally unexpected happened. The doors of the reception hall opened with a crash, and on the threshold appeared a man whose look alone made Mr. Golyakin's blood run cold. His legs became rooted to the spot. A cry of terror died away in his tightened chest. However, Mr. Golyakin had known this all along and had long been expecting something like it. The stranger solemnly and gravely approached Mr. Golyakin. Mr. Golyakin knew that figure very well. He had often seen it, had even seen it that very same day. The stranger was a tall, thick-set man wearing a black tailcoat and with an important-looking decoration in the form of a cross around his neck, and he was endowed with thick, jet-black side whiskers. Only a cigar was needed to complete the likeness. But the stranger's stare, as we have said already, made Golyakin go cold with terror, with horror. With solemn and grave countenance, this terrifying person approached the sorry hero of our tale. Our hero stretched out his hand to him. The stranger took it and hauled him along after him. With a lost, crushed expression, our hero glanced around. The stranger took it and hauled him along after him. With a lost, crushed expression, our hero glanced around. What is this guy, the punter? This is Krestia Ivanovich Ruinspets, doctor of medicine and surgery, an old acquaintance of yours, Yakov Petrovich. Someone's loathsome voice twittered right into Mr. Golyakin's ear. He looked around. It was Mr. Golyakin's twin, so repulsive for the vile qualities of his soul. An unseemly, malicious glee shone in his face. He was rubbing his hands in delight, rolling his head in delight, pattering around everyone in delight. He seemed ready to dance for delight right away. Finally, he leaped forward, grabbed a candle from one side of the servants, and walked ahead to light the way for Golyakin and Krestia Ivanovich. Mr. Golyakin Could clearly hear everyone in the hall surge after him, crowding and jostling one another, and all of them repeating with one accord, "It's all right, don't be afraid, Yakov Petrovich. After all, it's your old friend and acquaintance, Christian Ivanovich Rudenspitz." Finally, they came out onto the main, brightly lit staircase. The staircase, too, was packed with people. The doors on the porch were flung open with a crash, and Mr. Golyakin found himself on the steps together with Christian Ivanovich. A carriage harnessed with 4 impatiently snorting horses was drawn up at the bottom. In 3 bounds, the gloating Mr. Golyakin Jr. reached the bottom of the steps and opened the carriage door himself. With an imperious gesture, Christian Ivanovich invited Mr. Golyakin to take a seat. However, there was no need at all for such a gesture, as there were sufficient people there to help him in. Numb with horror, Mr. Golyakin looked back. The entire brightly lit staircase was swarming with people. Inquisitive eyes were looking at him from all sides. On the uppermost landing, in his armchair, presided Sofy Ivanovich himself, watching attentively and with profound interest all that was taking place below. They were all waiting. A murmur of impatience ran through the crowd when Mr. Golyakin looked back. "I hope there's nothing here reprehensible, nothing that might provoke disciplinary measures and draw everyone's attention to my official relationships," our hero said in bewilderment. There was a clamor all around. Everyone shook their heads negatively. Tears streamed from Mr. Golyakin's eyes. "In that case, I'm ready. I fully entrust myself. I put my fate in Christian Ivanovich's hands." The moment Mr. Golyakin spoke of fully entrusting his fate to Christian Ivanovich, a terrible, deafening, joyous cry rolled in the most sinister echo amongst the whole expectant throng. Christian Ivanovich from one side and Andrei Filipovich from the other took Mr. Golyakin by the arm and began putting him in the carriage. As for his double, he was helping him in front, behind in his usual dastardly way. The hapless Mr. Golyakin Sr. took a last look at everyone and everything, and shivering like a kitten drenched with cold water, if the comparison may be permitted, climbed into the carriage. Christian Ivanovich followed him immediately. The carriage doors slammed, the crack of a whip was heard, and the horses jerked the carriage into motion. Everyone rushed after Mr. Golyakin. The piercing, frenzied cries of all his enemies rolled after him like a valediction. For a while, a few figures could still be seen running around the carriage that was bearing Mr. Golyakin away, but gradually they fell further and further back until they were finally completely lost to sight. Mr. Golyakin's unseemly twin kept up longer than all the others. With hands in his trousers pockets of his green uniform, he ran along with a contented look, leaping up first on one side on the carriage and then the other. At times he grabbed the window frame and hung from it, poking his head in a blowing farewell kisses at Mr. Golyakin, but even he too began to tire. His appearance grew fewer and fewer until he finally vanished altogether. Mr. Golyakin's heart was filled with a dull ache. The hot blood rushed into his head and throbbed. He was suffocating and wanted to unbutton his coat, to bare his chest and sprinkle it with snow and pour cold water over it. Finally, he lapsed into unconsciousness. When he came to, he saw that the horses were bearing him along some unfamiliar road. To right and left loomed dark forests. All around it was bleak and deserted. Suddenly his heart stood still. 2 fiery eyes were peering at him out of darkness, and those 2 eyes were burning with malevolent, hellish glee. But it was not Christian Ivanovich. Who was it? Or was it him? It was Christian Ivanovich, not the earlier one, but a different, fearful Christian Ivanovich. Christian Ivanovich, I think I'm all right. Our hero tried to begin timidly and trembling, wishing at least somehow to mollify the fearful Christian Ivanovich with his meekness and submission. "You vile half-crafters mit Wut, liegt on servants of which do not deserve." Christian Ivanovich reply rang out, stern and dreadful as the judge's sentence. Our hero shrieked and clutched his head. Alas, he had long been expecting this. "You will have fathers mit Wut. You will have fathers mit Wut, licked on servants of which you do not deserve. You will have fathers mit Wut." I'm gonna look that shit up. Anyway, you will have fathers. You will have fathers. You will have fathers mit Wut, like on servants of which do not deserve. Trip. That's how it ends. He had long been expecting this. You will have fathers. You will have fathers mit Wut, licked on servants of which you do not deserve. Anyway, y'all. End of that book. Peace.